Well, now to a new global index ranking countries by how peaceful they are and their stability in the world in general. Well, it may be no surprise that Iceland is the most peaceful nation on earth, while Afghanistan comes in last. Europe remains the most peaceful region. The Middle East and North Africa saw the most improvement, but still it's the least peaceful region in the world. And as you can see here, 87 countries have become more peaceful, 73 countries experienced declines. Yet overall, the world's peacefulness ranking went down by a fraction, 0.07%. Another interesting finding and a sign of the times, the conflicts of the past decade have begun to abate, only to be replaced with new tension and uncertainty stemming from the COVID pandemic. Well, the rankings were done by the Institute for Economics and Peace, and my next guest is Serge Stroobants, the Director of Operations for Europe, the Middle East and North Africa. Good to have you with us.
Good evening from Brussels.
Before you break down the results, if you can for us, walk us through how you measure peace, because this index covers 99.7% of the world's population. What do you take into account before making the assessment?
Well, the Institute for Economics and Peace is composing its Global Peace Index around 23 different indicators. These 23 indicators are distributed over three families of indicators. We look at internal and international conflict, also the intensity of those conflicts. We look at internal safety and security, so within the societies, and we also look at levels of militarization. And putting this complex index together, this allows us to establish a ranking of the different countries of the world according to the levels of what we call negative peace, and that's the absence of violence or the fear of violence.
For the last 18 months, COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on communities and economies right around the world. We are now seeing a real disparity in the rollout of vaccines. Poorer countries obviously being left behind. Explain for us what sort of impact the pandemic is having on peacefulness and how this could play out in the coming years.
Well, the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on peacefulness is still unfolding as we speak. We saw that some forms of violence, like interpersonal violence, like homicide and violent crime, those levels were down very soon at the beginning of the pandemic, but this did not last for a long time. By June, July of last year, we were back at figures pre-pandemic. What we have seen is that civil unrest grew over the past year by 10%. We have identified in the world more than 5,000 pandemic-related violent events, and they were recorded between January 2020 and April 2021. We think that it's still too early to fully gauge the long-term effects on the pandemic on peace. But what we see is that the current economic conditions unfolding in many countries around the world will increase the likelihood of continued and increased political instability and violent demonstrations.
And speaking of violent demonstrations, we obviously saw a lot of violent demonstrations here in the United States last year, the insurrection notably at Capitol Hill. Iceland, New Zealand, Australia, they're all very much at the top of the index, but the United States ranks 121st on that global list. And it hasn't seemed to improve. Why does the US rank so poorly, and why is it that it hasn't really improved over the last few years?
Well, North America last year experienced the largest deteriorations in peacefulness of any region, and this was driven by an increase in violent demonstrations and political instability in the US. Last year, we saw some of the largest protests across the US, the largest protest in history, and they all soon spread from the United States to other parts of the world, to other regions of the world. Those violent demonstrations were, of course, fueled by COVID-19, the response to COVID-19, some political polarization, and also social movements like Black Lives Matter. Now, about the position of the United States, I think when you look at the three families of indicators that I explained before, so when we look at the number of conflicts in which the United States could be part of, when you look at the levels of safety and security, and there we use indicators like homicide rate, incarceration rate. When you look at the levels of militarization, where the United States last year was one of the largest I would say, decreases on this indicator, which means like large investments in militarization, it is almost logic that a country like the United States, when you look at those three domains, cannot have a high score on the Global Peace Index.
And talk to us a little bit more about this new wave of tensions between global powers, and what can we expect when you look at the trends? What can we expect going forward?
Well, we clearly see that the current geopolitical tensions between regional powers or global powers is, of course, having an impact on the levels of militarization. This is only an example. We have seen over the past decade a trend of decreased investment in militarization. This trend has been broken about 2 years ago. So in the past 2 years, we saw about 100 countries that at levels of militarization increasing, so a large investment in militarization. So clearly, this new world order, this new set of international relations based on competition between greater powers is going to create more tensions and is also going to create a largest investment in military assets and militarization throughout the world.
Serge Stroobants from the Institute for Economics and Peace. Good to have you on the program tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, still to come, seeing an exclusive report on Taiwan's race to get COVID-19 vaccines. One-on-one with the head of a Taiwanese company developing a local vaccine. Also, Ethiopia's Prime Minister promising free and fair elections on Monday, and yet parts of the country will be unable to vote at all. We're going to explain that just ahead.